Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast.
Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Alec Holler. Coach Holler has been a boys' assistant track and field coach at Edwardsville High School since 2010. He coaches the varsity defensive backs for the EHS football team and teaches physical education at Lincoln Middle School in Edwardsville. Coach Holler's event focus in track and field is the hurdles, and at Edwardsville, he has coached 13 state qualifiers, 9 All-Staters, 3 state champions, and 1 state record holder. So welcome to the show, Coach.
Thanks for having me on. Excited to be here.
Well, I appreciate you taking a little bit of time, and I don't know much about hurdling, so we'll just see how this goes. But I went back through and tried to do some research and learn a little bit about you and hurdling, and I found an article that kind of said that maybe you were the reason Feed the Cats got started to begin with.
Yeah, that's a funny story. I actually just told this story not too long ago. I came from a baseball town. My best friend growing up ended up pitching in the major leagues. They won state as their junior year, my junior year in high school. So I had a great time playing baseball in 8th grade. And I was telling my dad, like, Dad, I don't know about track, man. Track kind of sucks. You know, we just run and run until they make us tired, and there's not really much to it. And I really like baseball, you know. And so my dad is like, man, I'm over here, just won my 3rd state championship, and yet, you know, I'm having trouble to get my own son to come out for track. And so he's like, I promise it'll be better. Just give it a chance, please, you know. And so I'm like, all right, I'll give it a chance. And it did. It was different, and it was fun, and it was competitive, and that was the main thing. You know, growing up as kids, we were all just such competitors, and it felt like playing a game like baseball felt more competitive as opposed to, you know, running intervals. And so we were able to basically compete every day, whether that was trying to beat our previous 40 time or racing each other, and you know, we just made it fun.
And saying that, I mean, you've seen this from the inception, so you've got to see it grow from when you were an athlete to now you're a coach and you're instilling these principles. How do you think it's changed the way coaches view athletes in training?
Yeah, I think with every kid, I think we see the potential now to not only get in better shape, but literally change them as athletes. Whereas the traditional kind of school of thought was you recruit the fast ones and then you coach them to be in better shape and coach them to have better technique. Where now it's really exciting that the science really shows that you can physiologically change a slow person, maybe not to be a fast person, but definitely faster. And especially at the high school level in a 4-year time span, you know, we've had numerous examples of guys that were just the slowest on the team to next thing you know, they're like all-state type guys.
And I can think back to when I was in high school, especially with boys, you're hitting that growth spurt in that 4-year period. So coaching out 4 years, I mean, they definitely could be the slowest kid on the team. Then they hit the growth spurt, they grow into their body. All of a sudden you take that on top of the training and you have a real athlete there.
Yeah, and like, you know, comparing it to something like football, where you might have that 5 foot, 90-pound kid that's too nervous to come out as a freshman because they're getting their butt kicked. And, you know, you wish you had them because by the time they're seniors, maybe they're 6 foot and they're 175 pounds and they're a great looking athlete. And it's hard to keep them out because they're not, you know, at the level of their peers and things like that. But track is such a individual progress type sport where kids can get excited with their own self-improvement, even if they're running a 27-second 200 in high school. If they get down to a 25 by the end of their freshman year, they're like, man, I progressed a lot. This is exciting. You know, so it's a lot easier to keep guys out for that length of time to, you know, get that duration for the progress.
And the way you're instilling some of these techniques and ideas, you know, I talk to track kids all the time and they don't know their splits. If they're an 800 kid, they don't know their flying 10 time. There's so many things they don't know. Well, how do you show the kid he improved other than going to a track meet? Maybe he wins, maybe he doesn't. That doesn't seem like a great benchmark for improvement.
Right. And, you know, one thing that I share with my dad is we're both huge numbers guys. Growing up with him as a track coach, I was going to his track meets and stuff. I would love going through the numbers, the splits, the PRs, all those things. So I've been ate up with that since I was a little kid. And I find myself as a coach constantly being like, do you realize what you just did? Let me put what you just did, those numbers, that vertical jump, the 40-yard dash, whatever you just did in context. I coached the state record holder 110 hurdle guy, and he went this time at this age. And then you beat that just now. And they're like, wow, really? They have no idea, like you said. And so I just find myself, that's a huge part of my coaching, is contextualizing the data for the kids so they can get as excited as I am. Otherwise, you flirt around with that whole like mindless running. What's the point,
Yeah, and that really seems to turn kids off. If you just don't, it used to be you had to really enjoy running to do track. Now, as I talk to more and more coaches, they've changed the sport where kids really want to get involved.
Right, for sure. And I actually just went through speed camp. Our high school track coaches, we put on a speed camp, and my sons are 6 and 5. And so I've been doing it with them, like make sure you remember your 40 time. And, what'd you run today? And they'll tell me, I think I went 6:60. I'm like, oh my gosh, did you know the guy that just ran at the state track meet when he was 6 and he was at this meet? And so like I can even, like they can tell you now, even a week later, what their PR is in 40. It's just so awesome.
Now, I know coaching for you is kind of a family business, going back to your grandpa and probably even further behind that. But I heard you talk about you kind of got into coaching because you wanted to be the coach that you needed for hurdles in high school. How did that kind of develop?
Exactly. Yeah. Everyone just automatically assumes like, oh, he just must have had great experience with coaching, with his grandpa being a coach and his dad being a coach. So that's obviously the path that he went down. But I've actually had a lot of negative experiences with coaches and athletics and stuff like that, whether it's not having a hurdle coach growing up, where my dad's a Hall of Fame coach. He was great, and he actually instills a lot of confidence in people to take ownership of their specific event, even if he doesn't have time to go over there and work that individual event one-on-one. So I definitely wouldn't have changed that for the world, but there were definitely frustrating times where I'm like, man, I would kill for a hurdle coach right now. Even just a extra set of eyes, just to bounce ideas off of, back and forth, whatever. And you look around, there's just not a lot of dedicated hurdle coaches out there. And so I wanted to be that. And then I wanted to make sure that I was different than the negative experiences I had with, or relationships I had with some coaches that I had.
Yeah, I think it would take a certain kind of coach that really had a passion for the kids and that event, because, I've only been around a few hurdlers, but I've been around a lot of football players, and it seems to me like maybe hurdlers are the punt returners of track and field. It takes a special mindset to put yourself out there and tackle an event that is very demanding.
Absolutely. Mentally demanding, maybe more than anything. I mean, you got to be aggressive. You can't be scared. And you got to have the coordination too, to be able to take a lot of tiny little movements and body positions in a very short amount of time and be able to correct it. If I say your foot on takeoff was 6 inches too far out in front of your body and you need to bring it back under, there's so many kids that struggle with that, and it's frustrating. Some of them end up getting it, but some of them are just like, they have what it takes to hurdle. And that's, I think, best labeled as coordination. That's why I like the punt returner reference, because I coach punt returners too. And some of them just have it where it feels natural to them and they can take the coaching cues, and it just works. And some people just never get it. And, one thing that my football coach did with punt returners and my head track coach does with my hurdlers now is he's like, hey, every good hurdler or every good sprinter, take them, try them out for hurdles. A lot of them won't make it, but let's see if there's any naturals out there. And, so that's been a big part of our success, where a lot of sprint coaches would be like, yeah, this is my sprinter, man. You're not taking him, so he's kind of given me the pick of the litter and let me try to work with some kids to figure out who can take that difficult type of coaching and be aggressive on the hurdles.
Now, I would imagine confidence comes and goes depending on the day. So you're constantly working a brain that maybe really really confident one day, but the next day they just don't have it. How do you come in every day and work from where the kid's at to help them become the best hurdler they can be?
Yeah, so much of it is psychological, the day-to-day stuff where I have done this before, and so many coaches do this, and I warn them all the time when I talk to hurdle coaches is it's a lot easier to make a hurdler worse with your coaching than better. Meaning where it's like, man, this guy looks really good. All my core beliefs that they need to be doing in their hurdle technique and form, they're doing it. But what am I supposed to do? Just sit here and not correct something? And I've done that before too. It's such an easy mistake to make. I'm like, hey, you could be a little bit better if your left arm, your elbow was just a little more bent. Next thing you know, they're like trying to really bend their arm, and then they end up twisting, and it's like a house of cards. It can just really crumble, and then their confidence is shot. And I'm like, man, I should have just kept my mouth shut, And it can go the other way around too, where there's definitely things going wrong that they need to fix, but you don't want to beat a dead horse, and you don't want to keep saying, well, you did the same thing wrong again. You keep doing it again. You need to fix it. You need to fix it. They've heard it. They know, they're trying. And, you gotta, I think, confidence and health over everything with hurdles, and probably, any type of sprinting or maximum performance output is probably more important than getting the technique right. And, usually they'll eventually get it. There's like an epiphany moment a lot of times with hurdlers where there's just like, it all just kind of comes together, and all that time and practice where you're just beating your head against this wall, man, they just are not getting their knee above their foot on their trail leg, and it's just driving me crazy. And if you just kind of let things play out and let them self-organize, a lot of times it'll happen. And they're confident because you let them do it.
Yeah, that was an interesting take. I don't know if it was a podcast I had watched or your YouTube channel or whatever, but you talked about that. You can overcoach an athlete really quickly, and if it's a mental demanding sport, yes, you've created a basket case.
Absolutely. And, like I said, I've done it before, and it's an easy mistake to make. And I think the best way to get them out of that is start naming off things that they're doing right. Start being like, hey, you know what? That was a lot better. Just, simple, positive reinforcement. Just build them back up and get them confident again, and, let them figure it out on their own.
So something like that, you're always looking at stacking the wins. I mean, I think I've talked about it with other guests. You can stack the losses really easy, or overcoach. All of that could go together. But there may be days that you have to find the win to help that athlete keep moving.
Yes, exactly. A lot of times I'll be like, this year I had a really young group of hurdlers. I think it was like 4 sophomores and 5 freshmen was my entire group. And a lot of them didn't even have the speed or technique to be able to 3-step for a month. And I just couldn't get them to do it. And they were losing confidence. They were stuttering, things like that. And so, like you said, just trying to find a win. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm like, screw it. Let's just race. So I put, the 5 freshmen together, put 4 sophomores together, put them in a heat. Let's just race 3 hurdles and see what happens. And, I couldn't believe the improvements just within that race. Like, one guy 3-step for the first time out of nowhere. Another guy was super happy that he didn't realize he was the second fastest in the group, and so there were little things that gave kids confidence in that. And I'm like, they're still slow. They still got a lot of work to do on their technique, but today was a win, and yeah, like you said, stacking those wins and the little ones are just so important.
And sometimes you can get so caught up in the down the road aspect that you lose the sight. It's supposed to be fun. So coming back to something that they enjoy, getting their mind off of for a few minutes, do you find that it kind of helps out?
Absolutely. We got to have a good time over there when we're hurdling. We got to take a lot of rest between reps. And, if you're just sitting there worrying about the little technique things that you're trying to fix on your next rep and, being uptight, it's like, man, can you imagine golfing with your buddies and you're just sitting there not having fun with your friends and you're just all uptight, worried about the next drive? You're going to hit a bad drive, So definitely it's a good time to develop the relationship with the kids, in between reps and also, loosen and lighten the mood up a little bit to where, they're, happy and having fun and then we'll lock back in when our rep is up.
Now, young hurdlers like that, I've heard you talk about, in my mind, it could be very tempting to set up a hurdle that's a little bit higher than regulation. I don't know anything about it, so I'd be like, hey, if you can hit this, you can definitely hit what you have to hit on a meet day. But you actually do the opposite. You go with a shorter hurdle. Now, what are all the reasons that you want to be that direction on it?
Yeah, so I call it discount hurdling. As a hurdler with hurdle experience, I know that it was weird in practice. It always felt like I was jumping over the same height, same distance as I would in a meet, but I swear I had no trouble three-stepping in a meet. The steps were quick. I'm hitting my spots. But then when I'm in a practice setting, I'm like bounding to get to the next hurdle. My running form literally changes, and I'm kind of bounding higher over the hurdle too. I'm like, isn't this practicing poor technique? And so I'm like, what if we just try to set up race or practices to feel like a race? So what do we got to do? And so I'm like, let's shorten the hurdle, let's shorten the distance, and get these guys habits going where their form is habitual now. And then, we can move up to the higher height, or when the race time comes, hopefully they will revert to habit. So many times we fix a skill or we create a skill in practice, but it still kind of takes time to develop when competition happens. When you're thinking about competition, you're not thinking about a lot of the, cues we've been given, things like that, things coming out of blocks, like keep your heel low, and they'll cycle the heel just because they're wanting to race, they want to get up and race, things like that. So yeah, it's just all about like developing a habit, developing a skill. However, there are struggles with it because you're also dealing with confidence too. And there's a lot of kids that are like, hold on, coach, I'm not totally confident not jumping race height. And then all of a sudden in a race, it's different, And so I always sell them the idea and why we're doing our training this way. And like, hey, I just had the state record holder and we never once jumped competition height in practice. And they're like, okay, that's good, but I'm new. I need to do this. I'm like, all right, so I'm gonna give you a compromise every pre-meet day. So the day before a meet, you can jump at whatever height you want to kind of get used to things and, let them have ownership a little bit and take my ego out of it. And usually it ends up where they'll get comfortable after a few of those, and then they'll end up setting up the hurdle how I like it anyway. So, it's not without its challenges, but, I definitely think that my athletes are more prepared for when that epiphany happens, when that hurdle pop happens. Back in 2015, I had a sophomore hurdler go from 15:12 was his PR. And then he went 14:88, nice little PR. Next meet went 14:50. And then the next meet, 14:20, and then 13:98. It was just like boom, boom, boom. He just really, got it. And I think my hurdlers, when we use that method, are more ready for when that happens, because at the biggest meets, like the state meet, what do you see? You see a lot of people falling over the hurdles, maybe awkward landings over the hurdles, or they have huge PRs. I think the ones that are having huge PRs are ready for that race cadence and, not crowding the hurdle too much, because when hurdlers start to get going faster than they're used to, they end up taking off too close to the hurdle, and now they're going to plow right through it. And that's why I think you see a lot of hurdlers blow up at big meets, because they're ready to go fast, but they're not used to that goal race cadence, which is really what I'm trying to get to when I'm discounting the hurdles.
Now, listening to that, I get to talk to a lot of lifters. I've talked to a lot of power lifters. It's kind of the same theory in a way. By using the discount hurdles, it's like taking lighter weights going into the meet. So you don't have any of those wrecks. So now their confidence is hopefully at a high, where if you went at standard height or even higher, they have a few wrecks. All of a sudden, there's doubt in their mind. They can't run as fast as you would like them to.
Yeah, it's crazy how many parallels there are with like lifting and our way of training sprints and hurdles, and even distance running has some, parallels. When distance coaches, when you're like, hey, I want to get better at my 5K, what do they say? You need to run long, slower, you know, and it's kind of like making it easier in practice, I guess, to develop the skill. And same thing with lifting, and with hurdles is the same thing. We got to hurdle lower and hurdle closer, and develop the skill.
Now you're taking an event that puts two max effort exercises in a row. I mean, you have the max effort plyometric of jumping and running all at the same time. That's an incredible amount of stress on an athlete. So I know that keeping the athlete fresh is the number one concern. How are you able to manage that with the practices, the meets, and everything that is you do?
I'd say I would revert back to, I don't know what my dad calls it when he does his Feed the Cats presentations. It's like the 10 Commandments or something like that, he calls it. One of them, the key principles, whatever, is be uncomfortable with how little that you do. Like, you should always feel like, should we be doing more? And what else does he call it? Finding the minimum effective dose. And I found the minimum effective dose a few times through my own mistakes, where I had, some injured hurdlers that were kind of banged up, and they were just like, I just want to get through to the state meet and have a chance. I had one hurdler that just had nagging hamstring pain the entire, like a whole calendar year through junior and senior year. And it was basically like, well, I guess we can get your steps down for the 300 hurdles, but we can't really do 300 hurdle workouts. And what I learned was, if we get our steps right to the first hurdle and then get our steps right to the second hurdle, we cover everything we need to do, because the steps between the first and second should be the same as between every hurdle. So we really just practice the cadence we need for the whole time. And we're already doing, lactate type workouts with our sprint group. So why would I need to do more for a guy running 300 meters as opposed to a guy running 400 meters just because we got hurdles up? And so those were the kind of epiphanies. And I kind of took that over to coaching 110s too. I'm like, we went acceleration 8-step to the first hurdle. We went 3 steps to the second hurdle. What do you see in hurdles 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in practice that you're not seeing or can fix in hurdles 1 and 2? You can have issues with your 3-step or with your form falling apart in hurdles 9 and 10. And the number one reaction from a coach is, we got to get in better shape, right? You're just breaking down because you're not ready for a full race. And I'm like, you know what? I think the problem you need to look upstream, where they're starting to plant outside or in front of their body, and they're killing their momentum through hurdles 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then you're just noticing it because they have no more momentum left on hurdles 8, 9, 10. And so finding those minimum effective doses and those kind of epiphanies it came from struggle, from, athletes that were struggling, that we just had to figure out, what are the core things we have to do, and what are the things that we can get away with not doing.
Now, I've heard you talk about this a little bit too, that you will not run your hurdlers any more than 4 times in a week, and that's even including meets. So I would imagine at times that has to really be tempting to break your own rule when you have a good hurdler. How do you keep everybody on the same page of, this is what we do, it doesn't matter who the hurdler is?
Yeah, because good hurdlers they're good at it, so they probably love it. So they're probably junkies, just like you'll see in the jumps. What do jumpers want to do? They want to play in the sand all day. They want to get on the runway and jump, jump, jump. And it's the same with hurdlers. You have to cut them off when they want to do one more rep. It's so easy to be like, you're fine. You're not injured. Take another rep. That's totally fine. But again, I've been bit by that too. I had a one more guy about 10 years ago that eventually he limped off the track after a race in a meet. I'm like, what's going on? I thought you were fine. He's like, well, I didn't tell you, but my shin started acting up about a week ago. Next thing you know, we had a stress fracture. So I'm like, okay, I can't just rely on the kids to tell me when they're starting to get tired or whatever. Like, so with every guy, every hurdler that I have, I'm like, if you do 3 perfect reps, you're just done. We're not changing anything today. So let's take that small win and go home happy and healthy, knowing that we did not ruin tomorrow. We did not ruin next month. And that's easy. The hard one is the developmental hurdler where they keep making the same mistake over and over again, and you really like them and you really want them to figure it out so they're having a good time and they're not getting embarrassed in races and things like that. And that's, like you said, it's tough. And then on days where we're not hurdling, they want to hurdle too. But, as long as we keep their sprint practices fun and engaging, that usually holds them over until the next race. And then I'm also, always giving them my experience and try to feed them my knowledge. Like, hey, April, we have a lot of meets. This is where we have a lot of midweek meets and weekend meets. And, we got pre-meet hurdle practice. We got another pre-meet hurdle practice. So we can't really squeeze in a hurdle, workout where we're really up in the reps or anything like that, because it will add up. And I'm telling you, you do not want to hurdle at 90%. What's 90% of 15 seconds? You don't want to be there. And so, just sharing my experience, my knowledge with the guys. Hopefully they listen. And you know what? I got fish behind me here, big old fish that eat a whole bunch. One of my favorite pieces of advice for keeping fish is, hey, don't feed them too much. A hungry fish is a healthy fish. And a hungry hurdler that wants to hurdle more is a healthy hurdler. Keep them hungry.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's a really good analogy. Yeah, if they want to hurdle, you're going to get the best out of them. If they show up and they don't want to hurdle, I don't know that you're going to gain much ground.
Yeah, if we're in a practice, I'm like, come on, one more. They're like, coach, I'm dying. You think that rep's going to be any good? Absolutely not.
Now, you film every rep.
Uh-huh.
And then that's for your own personal use unless the athlete asks to look at it. And then you can kind of go over some finer points, or how do you work that? Because they obviously know that you're filming them.
Yep.
How do you manage that?
And this day and age, kids, they like to be filmed or see themselves on film. And, it's kind of one of those psychological things where I don't come to them. I never say, hey, come look at this, but they always come to me. So that shows them, or that gives them the ownership where, if they're frustrated and they're making the same mistake over and over again and they know it, they have the freedom to just walk back and get ready for the next rep. But a lot of times they want to see it and they want to be like, what do you see? And so I'm able to just give them a couple tidbits. And usually I focus on the positives. I'm like, I thought you did a little bit better on this part. And they're like, no. What about this part where I didn't do good? I'm like, yeah, you know it. So a lot of times I'll just show them, or I'll give them my phone and be like, and then they'll just see it, they'll nod, and they'll go on because they know what they're seeing. And Greg Popovich had a quote that I loved where he was talking about, I think, Tim Duncan after he made the Hall of Fame. And they're like, man, what'd you do to coach Tim Duncan? He's like, coach him. I didn't coach him. I gave him the knowledge to coach himself. And then whenever he wanted a second set of eyes, I was here for him anytime, And, I try to take that approach with my hurdlers.
That just led exactly into the next question I had set up for you is teaching the athlete to coach themselves. They don't need you there to tell them the mistakes a lot of times once they get some maturity. So allowing them to have the room to kind of work on some stuff, bounce some ideas off of you. How do you set that up where hopefully by the time they're a senior, they're coaching themselves and maybe even some younger athletes?
Yeah, I just had a athlete from a couple hours away come and do a hurdle session today. Yesterday, I had a college athlete who lives in Wisconsin drive all the way down like 6 hours. And, they're just looking for, like you said, like learning how to coach themselves. They know I'm not going to be there every day to walk them through and hold their hand, but it's showing them my process, what I'm looking for. And film is a lot of that. I'll show them how I watch film, how I scroll through the body positions that I want to see them hit, and things like that. And I'll have them randomly be like, hey, I know that I'm supposed to hit this position here, but I'm not. As you can see in this frame here, what do you think that is? And I just love that. They're sending me the exact frame that I would look at. They're looking for the problem upstream instead of downstream. And it just shows that they got the right way to think about solving a problem with hurdles. And so like I'm always there for them when I'm remote training people. But for the most part, teaching them how to hurdle and how to think about the hurdles and how to evaluate themselves, they can do it on their own.
And I would think that would help establish a better relationship between the coach and the athlete. You guys can have a discussion about what each of you see and then work through it from common ground, as opposed to an athlete that has no clue really. You're just shouting out commands and they're trying to make you happy.
Exactly. It's intrinsic. It's more fun for me. It's steal another one of my dad's phrases, endless feedback, positive feedback loop, where, they're happy because they know what they're doing. They're taking ownership. And then I'm happy because they're taking ownership and doing better. And, I'm like, with my experienced hurdlers, it's like I'm around hurdle coaches. I'm with my peers. We're working through things together. We're discovering things together. I'm like, man, this guy is like so good. What is it that's making him good? And so I'm able to analyze his film and try to pick out things that are different from him compared to someone else, or him compared to his previous self. And, we kind of find things together. My hurdler today, I noticed he started doing his lead arm different. Instead of just bringing it up with a block arm here, he kind of brought it around the side. And I'm like, where'd you come up with that? And he's like, I just did it and it felt better. And I'm like, you know what? Bringing it over the top prevents him from twisting and causing a recoil off the hurdle and getting twisted and slowing yourself down, keeps all your momentum going forward, your shoulders square. I love that. And then I try it on somebody else and they don't do it right and it don't work for them. And I'm like, oh, okay. That means the lead arm can be done multiple different ways. And it's just whatever works for that specific hurdler. And so I would never have learned that if it wasn't for coaching smart hurdlers that took ownership of their work.
And they have to have the confidence that they can try something and not just be burned at the stake for it. I mean, nobody's going to try anything if it requires a butt chewing afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. What are you doing? I didn't coach that.
Now, you talked about it earlier, and we can touch on it a little bit now maybe, but because you have the rules on your hurdles, 2 hurdles, no more than 4 times a week, all those different things, how do you manage the lactate work? Does that come straight from sprinting? How much stock do you put into that? Where does that fall in?
Yeah. So like I said, at first I thought I needed to do a little bit extra for the 300 hurdle work because you are dipping into the lactate system, but you're also performing a second skill on top of sprinting. You're hurdling, and it's a lot of things to remember and be able to do. And you got to be able to do them tired, right? That's the number one thing in basketball. You got to be able to shoot free throws tired. And, I would rebuttal to that. Like, don't you want to practice the best form? So when you're tired, you revert back to the habit that you created when you were fresh, and that's what we always say with sprinting too. And, so eventually I came to that epiphany, like I said, that, wait a second, why am I doing extra when our sprint group is training for 400 meters anyway? I don't need to do extra for 300s. So that really opened up a lot of time and freshness and better health for my hurdlers. We were able to practice other things. Nothing's more frustrating for hurdlers that, I've seen high volume sprint coaches, and there's more than one way to skin a cat. They might have success too. But a high volume sprint coach came up to me one time. He's like, hey, your hurdlers always seem to be stronger at the end of the 300 hurdles. And my guy just keeps dying. What do you do to train for that 8th hurdle at the end of the 300s? I'm like, get their steps right on the first couple. Their steps are going to be right on 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And they're like, I think they just kind of like shook their head and walked away because they don't like to hear that low volume stuff. But yeah, everyone's just bending over backwards to try to figure out the last half of that race. To like, they'll be like, okay, we're going to do 50 jumping jacks, 25 push-ups, we're going to do a minute of high knees, and then you're going to sprint 200, and then I'm going to put the last 3 hurdles up, and you're going to have to finish. So we're simulating what you're going to feel in a race. And, that makes sense. I get it. But it's something through experience I've learned that it doesn't translate. And what does translate is being efficient over the hurdle, getting your steps right to the first hurdle, steps right to the second. And if we spend all of our time going down that one direction, then they're going to get really good at it. And the 300s are going to feel easy, whereas somebody who might train with 10 times more volume than us, they haven't developed the skill. They're really in shape. They're really ready to run a great 300 meters, but they're still stuttering. So you're still having to reaccelerate and use up all your momentum. And so you're going to die in the end.
Now, listening to you talk about that, it reminds me of a conversation I had with Chris Corfus, and he kind of said the same thing, improving sprinters through efficiency. And I heard you talk about this also. The first thing that seems to break is their hips and upper torso.
Yeah.
So working the hurdles the way you do you feel like that is increasing the efficiency that carries them through? I mean, it sounds like that's what you're saying, but I don't want to be wrong on that.
No, that's absolutely what I'm saying. And that's why one of my biggest recruiting pitches, because like we've said before, hurdling is scary. You got to be aggressive. You can't hurdle scared. But when I get all the good sprinters I want to come try the hurdles, some of them are like, that's not me. I'm too scared. And I'm like, I get that. And so I have to, talk them off the ledge about, not being scared. And then the other thing is they're like, what if I'm not good enough? I'm like, that's fine, because hurdling improves sprint mechanics. You have to have great upright posture. Your hips can't be, was it pronated, whether tipped forward? Hips can't be tipped forward in hurdling. You got to have good high knees with hurdle form. And so worst comes to worst, you're not a good hurdler, but at least you got some really good sprint form and technique practice.
Well, that would move into a question I had, because not everybody that listens to this is going to be a hurdle coach. Most of them aren't even going to care. But watching your YouTube videos and your hip mobility, your hip strength, the things you do, how much would hurdling carry over to your everyday athlete? How much improvement could you see athletically as a whole?
Yeah, I actually reference a lot to my kids Sports Illustrated cover that I had when I was a kid. I think it was like the year 2000, something like that. Nomar Garcia-Parra, he got on roids, but he also did some other interesting things in the off season. They had a picture of him, I think, standing in front of a hurdle, and they had a big article about how he did a lot of hurdle training and hurdle mobility that off season, and he was having like an MVP type year. And one thing that I would say translates great from hurdling to sprinting or anything, and sprinting, everybody wants their athletes to be faster no matter what sport they do. And what attracts me for a kid to be a hurdler is, can they do hurdle mobility work with good high knees and flexible hips? And I can create that if they don't. I think hip flexibility, mobility, and strength is one of the easiest and quickest things to train. And 10 hurdle sessions, and these kids that go from like being super sore after day one, they can't get their knee to their armpit, they're just going through it with ease. And so that's, I think, the best thing that hurdling, or hurdle mobility at least, can offer to any sport and any sport coach, is that everybody wants their kids faster, and a great way to get faster is improving hip strength, mobility, flexibility.
The other aspect I heard you talk about is the acceleration, and the acceleration phase for a hurdler is they're going to hit it every time in between the hurdles. Yep. So if you naturally improve the acceleration phase, which is the majority of the race, in football it's the majority of the sport, you should, by theory, have a better athlete.
Yeah, hurdling does a good job at teaching you to be able to sprint with your hips a little bit in front of your toes and your nose and a little bit in front of your hips, without bending at the waist, without bending at the neck, anything like that. And I think that's part of hip mobility. To me, can you be completely upright with your posture in between the hurdle? Can you get that forward tilt without bending into the hurdle or out of the blocks? And it just incorporates so many athletic movements, and body awareness is a big one. If you don't have body awareness, you're going to struggle with a lot of skills, but hurdling is really going to highlight that. Track is a sport. I love it when people say it. They're like, you can't hide in track. You're putting yourself out there. In football or something, you could be the 11th best guy and maybe not get picked on and feel like you're doing pretty good. But in track, if you don't have very good hip flexibility, or if you can't get your hips past your toes, then you're going to get exposed. It's going to force that skill improvement, I think.
Now, as technical of a sport as this is, I've actually heard you talk about that technique drills, which everybody would probably want to do to improve their hurdlers. You can actually kill confidence with those. Now, how does that play over? And then how do you help build a hurdler, but you remove the technique drills that could actually hinder them from being better?
Yeah, I'm not afraid to go down as low as wickets to get to hurdle over. When somebody is, stressed out or depressed about they're over the top of the hurdle form, which is what everybody thinks about. Everybody thinks like, I got to be real good over the top of the hurdle. I got to have the best lead leg, the best trail leg, the best arm action. And what I always say is like, hey, listen, the most important thing is that you're fast when you're on the ground, that you are efficient with your strides into the first hurdle and in between every hurdle after that. Can you take off with one foot and land on the other, as opposed to having a wobbly takeoff and then kind of like a kerplunk 2-footed landing. And so I'm not afraid to just be like, all right, we're going to go the lowest notch and we're going to go really discounted distance as well. And I'm going to make you run through hurdles. If you can't run through that, I'll put a wicket up and make you run through that. And then I'm going to show you on film that you're still, 2 feet above the hurdle. And so if I did raise it back up to competition height, you don't have to change anything. And so it's just like those little type of experiments where kids are like, oh, wow, yeah. And when they see themselves on film, it just really helps their confidence. And I think grounding it might be the best way to say it. Ground them with like, hey, it's all about on the ground anyway. You are going to pick up the trail leg form. You are going to stop floating. I promise. Once you get more confident, you're going to stop projecting yourself straight up over the hurdle and hurdling 2 feet above the hurdle. That'll come. I promise you. It's not here now, but it'll come. And that's the number one thing I see improvement on throughout the year within races and things like that is the first race, they'll be way above the hurdle. I'm like, man, you can high jump 5'6" just with your hurdle form, and the more reps they get, the more races they get under their belt, they're going to start attacking the hurdle more. And that's how you get lower.
Now, you've had some success. You've had hurdlers do great things. Every year you're bringing in new freshmen. The battle starts over. How do you continually find a way to meet the athlete where they're at, bring the coaching back down to help the new kids come back up so that you got your next wave of hurdlers?
It's always a challenge. And I coach such a wide variety of athletes in my summers and the off seasons and stuff. I had a friend of mine, had an 11-year-old kid, never hurdled before, never ran track before, but he's like, I think he could do it. Would you work with him this summer? And so I started with an 11-year-old this summer. I've never started that young. And with that little of experience, I've started young before, but usually they get good at it and then they want, the training sessions with me. But this is starting from scratch with the youngest kid I've ever done before. And so like each one of these new experiences I have kind of like added more tricks to my bag of, meeting the kids where they're at, where, I'm checking off all these scenarios on boxes where I'm prepared a little bit better for the next one and things like that. So, I would just lean on experience and start as slow and low as possible and build up confidence. With this 11-year-old and using him as an example, we didn't jump a hurdle until day 3. And it was to the point on day 3 where he's like, can I jump over a hurdle now? I'm like, go ahead. And so the first hurdle he ever did was with great aggression and he attacked it. And I'm like, man, that was like kind of like having the hurdler come to me wanting me to coach him with the film and stuff like that. And so I started out so slow and low. I did wickets to start just to show them, the steps. This is where your steps are going to be. This is where you're going to take off from. This is how many steps you're going to take in between the hurdle. And then we just slowly built up the distance, built up the height. You still stay away from race height as much as possible, but we just, like you said, meet them where they're at and start as slow and low as possible. I know when I start the track season and I get a whole new batch of hurdlers, most of them have never hurdled before, like this year. And so I'll set up like 5 different lanes where I'm like, okay, this guy's a returning hurdler, so I'm going to put up, normal height and distance that we normally would. And then this person did a little bit of hurdling in middle school, so we're going to start them at the lowest notch and just kind of get used to going over the hurdle, and we'll slowly raise it up. And this group over here has never done it before, so I'll turn the hurdle over. If you turn a hurdle over, most of the time it's kind of like 1.5 feet, 2 feet off the ground, and it just kind of teaches them to jump long and transfer that momentum from vertical force to horizontal force over the hurdle. And then I'll have a lane with like just wickets, and kids are dying to progress to the next lane, and so it's kind of like a motivator for them. And it's always a fun challenge, starting with new, fresh groups and, seeing who picks it up the fastest.
So you're kind of finding a way to get them to come back to you. You're kind of setting a small standard, and then before you know it, all of a sudden, I guess kind of like the feedback loop, only now it's in training. They're like, hey, we want a little more. And then I suppose you want to stop before the wins are too far forgotten.
Exactly. Absolutely. And I really had the ball rolling. I had my first All-State hurdler about 10 years ago. And the next year I got another one. And then the next year I got another one. And the year after I got 2 more. And it was like, oh my God, like they're just learning from each other. And so if you can get the ball rolling to where you've developed a senior for 4 years, whether they're fast or not, they're going to help the younger kids because they have their own experience at that level. Like, hey, I was a freshman before too. I was over there in lane 1 starting with wickets, and now I'm over here, and this is what helped me. And just seeing people perform the skill correctly is such a good learning tool. And that's why it's just so important to have a big hurdle group. And you could probably say the same with any position group in football or whatever.
And you're building culture.
Right.
Because there's, a freshman always wants a senior to help them. They want some recognition from the upperclassmen. Well, if it comes packaged with help, establishing a relationship, well, now you have underclassmen who are really trying to perform because they don't want to let an upperclassman down.
Yeah, and I just love that about track. It's why track is probably my favorite sport, is that freshmen through seniors go together, and our middle school program, 6th grade through 8th grade, goes together, and there's no competition for between individuals for positions on the team. It's just everybody working towards the common goal of myself getting myself better. And, if you do a good job with a culture, you start to realize, or you make the kids start to realize that if I invest in other people getting better, I'm going to get that investment in return. If I cheer for my teammates, and I give them energy, their performance will give me energy, or they're going to want to cheer for me, and that'll give me energy. And it's kind of a pay it forward type thing where a senior helped them because they're on the same team and we all want to be good. We want our teammates to be good. We don't want to be the last place team at a track meet. So we're all helping each other. And so track is just the best for relationships with older and younger kids, high skill, low skill kids, things like that.
Anytime you can build a relationship in there as you as a coach with your team as teams, they see that everybody is coaching them to be better. They're just not robbing them of their athletic talents and putting it on display for their own accolades.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Now, this one's tough. You've done it for a long time. You understand it. But knowing the difference between a mechanical breakdown and a conditioning breakdown, the first place people want to go, like you said earlier, is conditioning. We'll just get you where you can do it longer. What are the subtle differences between a mechanical breakdown and a conditioning breakdown that you've seen?
Yeah, that is a good question. And it's tough, but I love it because relates so well to all aspects of coaching. If you had a survey of 100 coaches of varying different sports, what is your number one fear of, or what is the number one worst way that you can lose a game? And most of them would say that we got outworked, or we were not in as good a condition as the other team, right? So that's like the boogeyman of coaching, is not being conditioned enough. And that's one of the hardest transition things I've found from people that have asked questions about, hey, we're transitioning to feed the cats, but are you sure that they're going to be able to finish a full 300 meters without running 300s in practice and things like that? But yeah, I just treat everything as a mechanical error and trust the process with our conditioning, with our lactate workouts and scheduling. To me, that's the easy part, the scheduling and the planning of the workouts, planning around meet times and days and days off and things like that. I can sit here right now and write out a whole calendar of, this is going to be on this day and then this day, and this is going to be our progression, and we're going to have 8 lactate workouts by the time we get to mid-May and blah, blah, blah. And I know that process is going to work for a 300 hurdler, for a 4x4 team, whatever. I've seen it. I know it's definitely going to work. So really, any mechanical breakdown that I see, I'll treat it as such. And I really never blame conditioning.
Having it set up like that has to take a lot of mental stress off of you. It's going to work, so let's program the things we really, really need, and everything else is going to take care of itself.
So much more like time and energy that you can put into other important things when you're not constantly worried about, are we in shape enough? You can start to ask yourself questions like, have we got enough days off? Are our athletes fresh? Because you're not asking yourself those questions when you're worried about your team's conditioning. And we see testimonials all the time, emails, DMs, whatever, like, hey, I just want to let you know, I picked your brain this offseason. I'm sorry for questioning you. We had school record 4x4 and we did like 10 times less volume than we ever did. And it's just such a weight off my shoulders. They always have some type of comment like that, where to not have to worry about conditioning of our athletes is just such a weight off our shoulders.
Now we'll go back to, I skipped over it earlier. You were talking about arm movements and things like that. Yeah. Getting the center of mass correct in a hurdler, that seems like it wouldn't take much to throw the whole thing out of whack.
Yeah.
Without having them worried about their arms and worried about their lean and things like that, how do you kind of get them centered up where everything stays true?
Yeah, that's the arms is a kind of hot button topic with my hurdlers and me, because they feel it. Their arms are usually not good, especially early on or until they become more elite hurdlers. And that's the last thing that I touch on. I'm like, there are so many more important things that we need to focus on right now. And if we are focusing on arms, we're going to forget about the trail leg things we just talked about. So, we got to make sure we get the takeoff down, the trail leg down, the landing down, things like that. And then we'll start to broach the subject of arms. And the big reason for that is not that they're not important. They are super important, but bad arms are typically a byproduct of something else bad. So when you plant out in front because you're getting too close to the hurdle, so you got to kind of hit the brakes and jump kind of straight up, whether you're too scared that you don't think you can make it over the hurdle, or you're too close to it, or your plant steps out in front, you're going to be floating. And every hurdler knows what I'm talking about, the sensation where you're like, whoa. And what do? My son, I'll use him as an example again. We just went swimming and he jumped off the high dive for the first time. It's like a 20-foot diving board. And it's like the first 10 times he couldn't do anything but just put his arms out. It's like a human instinct response. And that's what your arms do over the hurdle whenever you're feeling that floating sensation. So I'm like, don't you think we need to fix why you have that floating sensation before we ever try to address the arms? Because through experience, I've tried to teach the arms like, hey, this is simple, easy enough. Your arms are straight. Your arms are long. That means they're heavy levers. And that's going to pull you back and twist. And now you're going to be slow going to the next hurdle. So just keep it simple. Let's just bend your elbows. And as long as your elbows are bent, you're going to be improved. And they're like, okay. And then they go again, and it's airplane arms again. They're like, why can't I fix it? And I'm like, well, you can't control it. If you're planting way out in front and skying over the hurdle, your arms are going to do that. I don't care how hard you try or how much you focus on it. But when they do get to that point where they're not floating over the hurdle, then I'm like, okay, let's keep it simple with the arm action. We want the elbows bent, try to keep them at 90 degrees as much as possible. And we're going to keep it as close to normal running form as possible, where I like to say, pick the nose, pick the pocket, your hand in front of your nose, hand in front of your pocket, or on the side of your pocket. And then we're going to just kick that elbow out. And the only reason we're doing that is because that arm has to come through as your trail leg is coming forward right in its way. So that's the only reason why we have to change things up. Otherwise, it would just be normal running form. So keep them bent. Try to keep your arms from crossing the midline, because if they cross, even with a fist, my shoulders are turned. And every action in hurdles has an equal and opposite reaction. So now I'm going to end up coming off the hurdle, twisting even harder, and my momentum is going to get slower to the next hurdle, and it's just going to snowball on me. So I just say, keep your elbows bent. Elbows out is a cue that I like, because if my elbows out, my hands can't cross the midline. So elbows bent, elbows out is probably the simplest way that I can coach the arm action. And then, we can get a little bit more detailed with it whenever I get to, the more elite hurdlers, like the hurdler I was talking about earlier with his kind of swing action to get to the body position. I'm like, hey, I just want you to get here at some point. If you go straight up to do it or you go around to do it, whatever feels comfortable to you. I just know you have to get here. And if that way feels more comfortable, then great.
So you pursue the avenue of you look at every possible symptom before you get to this arm diagnosis. And theoretically, hopefully you find it in there and then you never even have to discuss it.
Absolutely. As a slide in one of my presentations actually is symptoms and diagnosis. So many people that come to me asking about hurdle coaching, they're like, I've never coached hurdles before. I've never even heard of what you're supposed to do with hurdles, And I'm like, I've coached hurdle coaches to be good hurdle coaches with even less experience than you. People that have never even been a coach before, I can coach them to be good at hurdles. Like, all you have to do is know your role as a hurdle coach, and you're there to facilitate confidence and safety and let the hurdler kind of do the work. If you aren't comfortable doing anything, you can hold the camera, you can hold your phone up, and then you guys can analyze the film together. Don't try to act like an expert. Be like, I don't know, but it seems like you're skying way too high over the hurdle. That is the symptom. So now your role is, what is the diagnosis of the problem? What caused the symptom? And I always just say, look upstream. If you see it over the hurdle, the reason is probably on before they got to the hurdle, and so just keeping it simple with, future hurdle coaches is the best way. And that's how I treat my hurdlers too. Try to keep things simple and make them feel like they have the power to improve themselves without needing all this super technical mumbo jumbo and corrections that I got for them. I'm like, hey, it's working. So my state record holder that I referenced earlier, he went 1359 and 1367, 1371, and 1379. The previous, and that was all of the state meet his junior and senior year. So he ran it 4 times. He ran the state record. The previous state record was 1380. So he ran it 4 different times. And so it's funny, I got invited to speak at a lot of clinics after I had him. And a lot of coaches would be like, hey, don't you think his back arm's a little too straight? And they had these little corrections. I'm like, yeah, I totally agree. But I time him. I use my camera to time to the 100th of a second from takeoff to landing on the first hurdle to landing on the second. And I'm like, I tried to change it, and all it ended up doing was making him start running with his arms side to side. And so I'm like, you know what? Forget about that. And so his back arm would always straighten. And that's against what I think arms should do, but it works. I'm like, I time him every day in practice. You see the results. I'm not going to mess with a good thing. He was by far the best hurdler in the history of a talent-rich hurdle state. And I'm like, don't fix it if it's not broken. But so many coaches want to keep, doing that.
Yeah, it's kind of like you get on Instagram or something like that. You see the videos. Man, there's more than enough people there to critique the video.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, yeah, I can see what you're saying, but was it worth bringing up? Is it really going to fix that much?
Right. Yeah. It's just going to, fix maybe my ego that I can say that I controlled his arm action or something.
Now, I've also heard you talk about creating a big split, and whatever the front leg does, the lead trail leg has to do.
Yeah.
I understand the importance of that in hurdling. Do you think that's one of those things that really carries over to straight line sprinting as well? I mean, that power that is created from hurdling?
Yeah, so I used rubber band analogies in hurdling and sprinting all the time, and I think that's the connection, is that so many hurdle coaches do something that I disagree with. They want to overcoach the trail leg. They say, you need to pull it through. And like, it totally makes sense. Again, I totally understand why you're saying that. But to me, the trail leg is another byproduct. If you get that big split, you're stretching the rubber band. And then as soon as that toe comes off the ground, you let the rubber band go and it just, whew. And all you have to do is make sure your knee stays above the foot so you don't clip the hurdle. And then your leg can come back into the center position in, proper sprint form. And so we also talk about that with coaching sprinters too. We want them to be elastic. We want to create that same stretch and then snap response when it's stretching with the knee up, and then boom, the rubber band pops and the vertical force is created.
So the theory is the trail leg has nothing left to do but come forward.
Exactly.
Because the body's spread out too much that it has to do that to make the contact you need on the ground.
Yeah, the big split has so many good byproducts as a cue. When you try to get them to have a big split, you can't have a big split unless you are a proper distance away from the hurdle on takeoff. That's something I found myself coaching more and more, is distance away from the hurdle on takeoff. Boo Schexnayder, one of my favorite sprints, hurdles, and jumps coaches ever, he talks about it, very specific takeoff distance for girls and boys. And for boys, it's 7 feet. Sometimes I'll put a piece of tape down at 7 feet to make sure they're doing that. And if they're ever even 6 inches in front of that, their split is not as big. Their rubber band does not stretch as much. So, and that's a hard thing to do. Say, hey, your foot was 6 inches too close to the hurdle, bring it back. It's like, okay, I'll try, but no guarantees. But if you just tell them to focus on the big split, then they're probably going to naturally self-organize to get themselves far enough away from the hurdle to where they're really leading in. And then the other thing is they'll naturally have to get their hips rotated forward. And now we're in that good acceleration kind of tilt into the hurdle, transferring that vertical force of sprinting to boom, it's horizontal force over the hurdle, and then landing we're right back into vertical.
Now, talking about the acceleration and the body positions and all that, how much time do you spend in acceleration work?
You know what? My number one thing that I do most frequent and I think most important is 110 reps over just the first hurdle. I think the first hurdle is so important, and I think it's the place where you can get the most bang for your buck as far as improvement. There's so many hurdlers that have a terrible first hurdle, and then they kind of figure it out as they go. They start to gain momentum. You see them start to come from behind, and they start to catch up with the crowd, things like that. So I'm like, another thing that I just kind of learned in my experience, I'm like, okay, my hurdler has sucked to the first hurdle every meet this year. So I'm just going to work on nothing but that. They've been great in between the hurdles, so I'm just not going to work that anymore the rest of the year. So the last 2 weeks of the year, every practice, we did nothing but the first hurdle. And it was the hurdle I was just telling you about that went from 15:12 down to 13:98. When he ran that 13:98, he was leading after the first hurdle for the first time all year. I'm like, oh my God, you knew something big was going to happen. And, improving the acceleration phase, the body positionings, and the takeoff on the first hurdle. It's kind of like the 300s too. If you get your steps right to the first hurdle in the 300s, your steps are probably going to be better on the second and third and so on. And I've learned that, same goes with 110s.
Now, in a society where more is better, I've heard you talk about in the off season, you don't want your hurdlers hurdling. I mean, they can do top speed work, acceleration work, all the sprinting work they want to do, but don't get the hurdles out. Don't even really think about it. How do you find that helps?
Yeah, so I actually just hurdled a guy today for the first time since the state meet 1 month ago. And so I asked him, I'm like, this is your first time, you haven't hurdled at all since, right? And like I said, I time every video I'm curious to see what your touchdown time is to one and to the second. And after not hurdling at all for a month, he ran PR touchdown times to the first and second hurdle. So I think I'm a big fan of multi-sport athletes because I think it grows athleticism, doing other different types of movements, first of all. But also I think your brain needs a break. Your body needs a break from those type of movements. And, I don't know, absence makes the heart grow fonder type of thing. My freshman hurdlers always come back super confident compared to where they were. I'm like, we haven't hurdled in 9 months. Where's this confidence coming from? But I don't know, they're older, they're wiser. They went out and saw the world, did a football season, a basketball season, and, they came back ready to go. Now, I do a little bit more off-season training now, but I just make them do it very infrequent. I'm like, you definitely need a lot of time off after the season, and you definitely need to do another sport. And usually that takes them right to the other sport, and I'll see him in 6 months. But sometimes, like the hurdler today, he just graduated, so he's going to go to college for hurdling. He has nothing else to do. I'm like, all right, we'll hurdle once a week, so it's no big deal. But I think sports have become such a year-round thing that, you got to be careful about what you tell people what to do about off-season stuff. I think they overdo it. And I've seen throwers, jumpers, all different event types where they're doing it year-round, but they're not getting better. Their form might look better, but their results are not improving, as opposed to the high school that I'm at has a great culture as far as multi-sport athletes and coaches, sharing kids, not being selfish about off-season workouts, things like that. And it's just really worked for us.
Yeah, sometimes maybe they accommodate to the sport or whatever. So getting away, you break down that barrier or whatever it is. So then the next time your body has the ability to adapt to a bigger challenge. Maybe that's it. I don't know. But the one thing I was thinking about with hurdlers, you're on a stage where wrecks happen. Hurdles get knocked over, you fall on your face. You need a fearless athlete to do that. But also the pressures of the crowd watching, embarrassment, all the stuff that goes with it. How do you navigate an athlete that maybe has been in a wreck, they're embarrassed, they don't quite know how to come back? How do you coach them back to where they need to be?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, and we said before, track is a sport where it feels like the spotlight is on you. It feels like you're the only one on the track and everybody there is just looking at you. And I found actually the fear of falling and crashing and things like that is worse before the crash than after. The biggest emotion that I get after a crash is anger. They're so mad at themselves. But you can almost sense a slight bit of relief, like the fear is gone. I got it under my belt. It happened. But also I really am conscious of that with my coaching. Like my only coaching with trail legs is safety, because I think most crashes happen because of a bad trail leg. So I'm like, hey, I got 3 rules for the trail leg. I won't say another thing about it. I want your knee to stay higher than the foot. So if this is my knee and this is my foot, if it ever gets inverted, your foot will follow. And that's how you come down on a hurdle and hook the hurdle, and then you fall on your face. The other way you can do it is if your heel is not to the butt. So it's hard to kind of imagine, but you got to pull your heel to this, your foot's on the side of your body, but you pull your heel as close to your body as you can, because if you extend the knee at all, your foot's going to get lower. Once again, you're going to hook the hurdle. And then the third strike would be toe up. The toe has to be up and out, because you can do everything right with the knee higher than the foot, the heel's to the butt, but if the toe dangles, you're going to hook the hurdle. So that's literally all I coach with the trail leg, because like I said, the speed of it is really more of a reaction in my mind anyway. And so the emphasis of the trail leg safety, I think, puts more, kids' mind at ease. And then another one of my big coaching points that is counterintuitive to a lot of the hurdle coaches that I've been around is we never try to get low to the hurdle. We're never actively trying to see how much of a skim we can get over that hurdle as possible. I'm like, I don't care about that. I care about you hitting your proper takeoff position, getting that horizontal momentum. And if your hips just so happen to be 6 inches above the hurdle, I'm not going to sit here and be like, let's get that down to 3. Because that's how another way that crashes happen. I knew a guy that they nicknamed Crash because he would crash into hurdles all the time. And his favorite thing to do in practice was set a pebble on a hurdle and try to kick it off, trying to skim low as possible. And again, so many of these things they sound common sense. And then you get some experience and you start to think like, well, what if it's the opposite of that? I don't know. You just can't help but start to ponder those type of things. And it has opened my mind up to so many different epiphanies.
Yeah. Just taking time. What's it hurt? Let's just see what happens. Or how much time are we talking about from being 2 inches over a hurdle to a pebble? Because if it's not showing up on the stopwatch, who cares?
Yeah. I mean, what's your return on investment?
Right.
You're getting maybe a tenth of a second better, but you're crashing every fourth race. No thanks.
Now, this is from an article you had wrote, and I'd read it, and I could kind of relate to it a little bit. But Brandon Battle, he did the Triple Crown for you guys. You were able to watch as that goes on, and it's hard to explain to somebody that doesn't maybe get to be involved with an athlete like that and watch them do their thing. An athlete taking you on a ride like that, you're not trying to take credit. You're just along for the ride. What does that mean as a coach and a fan, both, to see something like that come to fruition?
Yeah, one thing that really sticks out in my mind about coaching Brandon was we were all so nervous. We knew how special he was, obviously, going into his senior year. He lost his junior year to COVID, and he was looking good. And then his senior year, he was looking amazing. We would see him shoveling lane 1 so he could do workouts in the snow and stuff like that. So we knew he was going to be amazing, and his speed numbers were as good as better than anybody we've ever had in practice. And so we just really didn't want to screw it up. That was our main focus. Don't get him hurt. Make sure he's just ready to do his thing. And the best compliment we received after that year was a coach that I admire. He just texted me like, "Hey, you might not know it yet, but someday you'll realize how good of a job you did with Brandon Battle to just not screw it up." And I'm like, yeah, that's all we wanted to do. And so we sat down and we mapped out what events we wanted to run at which meets does he need to take off? That's something that not a lot of coaches think about, but if you look at the best sprinters in the world, they're not sprinting in 4 events twice a week. Track season has about 20 meets. And so that's overtraining when you really think about it. When you look at the best sprinters in the world that are getting close to their genetic ceiling, if they did that much running, they're going to probably deal with injuries. And then, what happened was coaching that prodigy led us to being like, okay, this worked with Brandon. Why wouldn't it work with somebody else? And then, it led us to try new things with all of our kids. And one thing that came of that was this year we had mandatory teacher meetings after school on Wednesdays, and we didn't know what to do about that. It was our first year doing that, and we're like, with Brandon, we would have just given him the day off. We're like, well, let's just give him a day off and see what happens. And we were ready. We were scared. We were worried about it, that fear of doing too little. And we were ready to have practice after our meetings on Wednesdays as soon as it felt like we weren't doing enough. And we had our most injury-free year probably ever this year with just that midweek day off. And I really think that kind of came from trying not to screw it up with Brandon. And so much of coaching Brandon was also, just mental, just letting him know we're there for him. We're with you was so huge to Brandon, and everybody wanted to run for Brandon. And it was a good teaching moment for our culture too, where he was just as good, but probably better of a kid as he was a runner. I mean, just an absolute once in a generation dream. I cannot imagine having a better kid than him. And he was well liked by everybody. Everybody didn't want to let him down. And I'm like, see, guys, imagine if we were like that with everybody on the team, with every single season. Because Brandon really brought out your guys' A game because you didn't want to screw it up because he's the Gatorade Player of the Year. And, why not do that for your 2-leg on the 4x1? Why not do that for everybody? So we learned as much from Brandon as we taught Brandon.
And that's a great explanation. I was around some athletes and that had a lot on the line. And when you're really committed to that athlete and you're listening to them, it doesn't take very long to realize that, oh crap, I can't ruin this dream for this kid. I have to find a way to facilitate or shut them down so we don't ever reach that point. And then everything else is cross your fingers and hope it works out.
Well said. Couldn't say any better myself.
Well, the articles and stuff I read, your YouTube channel, it's all amazing stuff. I don't imagine I'll ever coach hurdlers, but the information that you put out there and the way you freely give your knowledge is incredible. I know I appreciate it just because I think it will help sprinters. I think it'll help all athletes just to be able to see some of that stuff.
Yeah, and that's really my hope because like you said, there's not a lot of hurdle coaches out there. And even though there's a lot just trying to do the best they can, and I hope my content helps them, but I also love the transferability of philosophies, because a lot of my hurdle thoughts and philosophies and sprint training philosophies come from, other types of coaching, whether that's, do you practice shooting free throws tired or fresh? Those type of things are so cross-curricular, and I think everybody can, at least hopefully, it'll make them think.
Well, I know I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the conversation tonight. I appreciate you taking some time. I know things are probably hectic up there. You got some little kids. That always makes life interesting, but thanks for coming on the show, Coach. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I had a blast. I had a great time. So thanks for having me on.